Hello, and welcome to St. Joe's Parish on this 7th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The author of the Gospel of Luke continues Jesus' Sermon on the Plain this week with a radical teaching, good news that doesn't sound like good news at all. The command to love our enemies, to do good to those who hate us, to bless those who curse us, to pray for those who abuse or mistreat us, is not just a suggestion, nor is it something reserved for extraordinary person in extraordinary circumstances. For Jesus, it is simply what disciples who have experienced God's mercy and love must do. In his Sermon on the Plain, Jesus has no interest in extolling common sense or in commending reciprocal neighborliness. To repay kindness with kindness or to think of virtue in terms of fairness or equity is to completely miss the point of his ethical teaching. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Rather, Jesus is calling his disciples to be like God, to be as God is, to be merciful, generous, compassionate, and to have a profound concern for the well-being of everyone and everything. At one level, Jesus' saying on love gives direction to the Christian life. Faith produces the fruit of love. Yet on another level, these absolute ethical demands call us to conversion, because such love is beyond us. Jesus' teaching on love forces us to rely not on our own self-righteousness, but on Jesus' faithfulness. Remember, for Luke, it is the poor who are blessed, for theirs is the kingdom of God. It is only in the perfect love of Christ that we recognize our poverty and our need for God's grace to be able to live these radical demands. The call to love your enemy does not mean to make your enemy your best friend or fall passionately in love with those who mistreat you, but rather to keep open the relationship by responding to conflict in ways that promote unity and oneness that binds us to God and to one another. When we shun hatred and revenge, we choose life for ourselves and for others. In his book, Whatever Became of Sin, by Carl Menninger, a well-known psychologist, wrote, "If you want to find a germinating word to link all sins, perhaps hatred would do it. In terms of action, however, the long-term consequences of hate are self-destruction." Aware of the challenges faced by those who ponder the scriptures, the participants at the Second Vatican Council declared, "Insofar as human beings are sinful, the threat of war hangs over them, and hang over them it will until the return of Christ. But to the extent that humanity vanishes sin by a union of love, they will banish violence as well." Those words spoken 60 years ago continue to remind us to live the radical demands of Jesus means to become a person who deals with conflict with others by always looking for moments of dialogue, understanding, and respect. A lesson I learned from my mother, who told her children that after an argument or fight, we should never go to bed without forgiving one another. It was a rule I followed even when the words of forgiveness I mouthed to my siblings were often in conflict with the feelings in my heart. I think our mother hoped that the words of forgiveness we spoke to each other would find their way to our hearts and help us to understand how reacting to hurt by getting even often caused more pain and disharmony in our home. Without this motherly rule, I think I would have allowed my natural human instincts to protect and defend myself to guide my action when hurt or mistreated. We find similar codes of conduct in the Hebrew scriptures, which dealt with the destructive force of violence and revenge in society that highly valued family honor. The phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, was a very simple punishment code that limit the retaliatory action of an offended person towards someone who didn't belong to one's extended family. Yet the divine call to love should help us to recognize that we all belong to one family, and that the only way to vanquish the violence found in our world is for each of us to have a concern for the common good. In our first reading, David rejected the chance to murder Saul out of respect for God, who anointed Saul to be king. Jesus asks us for more than that when he says, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. This leads into what Pope Francis calls the hard work and craftsmanship of building peace. According to Francis, peace among those who have been enemies, be they the perpetrators or the victims, is a patient effort to seek truth and justice, to honor the memory of the victims, and to open the way step by step to a shared hope stronger than the desire for revenge. Francis gives us details that concretize Jesus' call in the Sermon on the Plain. There is no getting around it. Jesus demands a great deal of those who would be his disciples. The challenge of today's gospel is to believe that the alternative Jesus offers is possible. Francis suggests that the way into that possibility is to cultivate shared hope. That implies that we contemplate Jesus enough to begin to share his vision of the world, a vision he describes as the reign of God.